So my name is Santiago Ron, Santiago Ron. Ron is my last name, actually. I am a curator of amphibians and also professor at Universidad Católica del Ecuador.
Super.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Carl, so one thing, can we not have flashes?
Sure.
And sound during the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we rolling?
Yep, rolling. We're rolling and good. So Ecuador is one of the first places where rapid decreases in populations and even disappearance of frogs was observed and documented. Could you summarize these events in terms of the time when these events began and just how rapidly the declines occurred?
So these amphibian declines in Ecuador took place since the late 1980s until the early 1990s. What happened here is that we suddenly noticed that the amphibian populations, frogs, especially diurnal toads that were very abundant in the Andes, began to disappear, suddenly to disappear, even though they used to be very abundant species. One of those species is the Jambato toad, which used to live here in Quito, in this city. And it used to be so abundant that during the breeding season, you have to be careful when you were in the field not to step on the frogs, because you will find about 2 toads on each square meter. So that changed very suddenly in 1988. That's the year when that species disappeared. And after that, nobody saw that species for 27 years, until 2 years ago, there was a rediscovery of one population on a distribution range that used to be very large. So that decline is emblematic of everything that happened here. Many frog species disappeared, especially those living in the highlands and also the ones that breed on streams.
So very rapid. And do you recall that there were other places in the world about that time that this was happening as well?
Yes, North America, Australia, and also Central America are places where similar declines took place about the same time.
So have there been any signs of recovery in recent times? Is it just the one that was found in Quito, or are there other species that have now sort of come back a little bit?
Well, there is hope. During the last 5 years, 5 species that were considered either possibly extinct or extinct have appeared again. But in the 5 species, we have only found a few individuals. So it's not like they are returning to the abundance that they had before. It's just one population where you will find a few individuals. So we are not sure if these are populations that were there before and never declined, or whether this is a sign of something that is changing now in the field. We are hopeful that maybe these populations have been able to evolve resistance to this disease that was the possible culprit of these declines. And if that is the case, then we are hopeful that in the future more populations will appear.
So what was the general consensus regarding the cause or causes of these declines? And what's your opinion? Because I know it may be a little different.
Sure. So these declines have been enigmatic for a long time. During the last, I would say, decade, there appears to be a general consensus that the main cause was the arrival of an exotic disease, something similar to what happened when the Spaniards came to America and brought with them smallpox, and that wiped out populations of Native Americans. Something similar happened here during the late 1980s. A disease arrived, and that wiped out many species of frogs, especially those that breathe on water. So what is that disease is something that has still to be explored. Many people think that that disease is a chytrid fungus that attack the skin of the frogs and the toads. But the evidence, at least for South America, is not entirely consistent with that hypothesis. We believe that maybe there is a different disease, which was the one that caused the declines, and the chytrid was a secondary pathogen that took advantage of the other disease, which was making the frogs weak and open the opportunity for other diseases to attack.
So what do you think are the most important solutions to preserve the present diversity of frogs and possibly reverse the declines that have occurred?
Well, declines are occurring permanently here in places like Ecuador, in general in the tropics. The main reason right now is habitat destruction and also climate change. The enigmatic declines that took place during the late 1980s, which were very sudden and, as I say before, remain a little bit enigmatic, are different. And those were caused by, as I mentioned before, a disease that came from overseas. So to avoid those declines, the main way of avoiding them to happen again in the future will be to ban completely the import and export of amphibians as pets. That is a very dangerous business because it opens the opportunity of diseases moving with the frogs when they move across continents. So in my opinion, what has to be done, and I think that most people who knows about these issues share the same opinion, a total ban of movement of wild amphibians across borders at the global scale. That will be something that will help to avoid this type of sudden declines that happen here in Ecuador. But another very important step or strategy to avoid amphibian declines will be to protect the habitat. The forests where the frogs live have to be protected, because if the forest is destroyed, of course the animals that live there, not only frogs but everything, will disappear. And that is happening very quickly and also all the time in countries like Ecuador, and especially in the Amazon region right now in South America. So protect the forest, protect the habitat. That is a very important step to avoid amphibian declines. And of course, another factor that will impact amphibian populations in the future is climate change. So any step that the humanity can take to decrease the projected climate change also will give a lot of help to frogs and also to all biodiversity.
Yeah, so the oil companies have been in for criticism for burn-offs that kill insects, and so it draws the prey of birds and frogs, the insects.
Yeah.
So to what extent do you think these and other policies of the oil companies compare to say the adverse effect of the road building? Maybe the road building is more important than these other things.
Yeah, for sure. So the practice of many oil companies here in the Amazon of burning the gas, the excess gas that they have when they produce the oil, will attract lots of insects, and of course that will have an impact on wild populations of insects. Fortunately, they are not so widespread and so abundant in the forest to have a major impact. But what I think that is the most important impact of the oil industry on wild populations here in Ecuador is the construction of roads. Whenever an oil company starts an operation, it will build new roads, and that will allow people to enter and to destroy the forest. That is the main impact of the oil industry. And if you take a look to a map of the Amazon right now and you look to satellite images, it will be very clear. Wherever you have a road, you have a forest that is destroyed, completely wiped out. So avoiding building roads, which goes in hand to try to use less oil and also avoid open new oil fields, will also help a lot for conservation in the Amazon region.
Great. So some conservationists think that captive breeding of rare and endangered species is critical. The goal would be to reintroduce these frogs to areas where they have disappeared. What do you think about this proposed solution?
I will say that this is only one more tool on a set of tools and strategies that we can take to protect amphibians and animals in general. Captive breeding is expensive, and stories of success of captive breeding are limited. There are not too many examples of where you can say, look, this program is actually really, really successful, and this is something that helped to save these species. There are not too many examples like that. But I will say that in some cases, under some circumstances, it will be the only strategy available for conservation species that are on the brink of extinction. I think that also captive breeding have a very important role for scientific research and also to know the general biology of the amphibians that we are trying to protect. For example, for some species of amphibians of Ecuador that disappeared, we don't know even when they breed, how many eggs they lay, we don't know anything. And when we bring them to captivity, it is much more easier to learn about their natural history, the demography, and at least have some information that can guide us to establish conservation programs in the field. So the fact that you can also do research and get to understand better the biology of the animals is also very helpful for conservation, and that is also something that you can get with these ex situ conservation programs.
Yeah, I guess to me it seems like the worst problem is you have the captive population, but you don't have any of the habitat that they came from, and so. Yeah,
reintroduction is really difficult because unless you solve the problem that produced the decline of this population, then there is nothing you can do. So in the case of the disease that arrived here to South America, unless we are able to eliminate the disease in the field, then there is no hope to reintroduce those animals. So, it's a difficult situation. Something that can happen on the long term maybe is to try to evolve resistance to those diseases in the laboratory, but that is something that, it remains as a big hope, that something that can be done in the future. Right now we don't know enough to do such thing.
So it would seem to me that another strategy or an important component to this is to get the awareness of the public and to get them excited about frogs. And I think you had a great idea that comes from all the bird watchers have these big days and big years and so forth. And what's your idea to make as a good publicity for frogs?
Well, we should do a big frog count day to try to raise awareness about the importance of frogs, of amphibians in the environment, especially in places like Ecuador, where you have so many species of frogs. Ecuador is really fortunate because it ranks 4th worldwide in the number of amphibian species. The only other countries that have more species than Ecuador are Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, which are huge compared in size. So Ecuador is a very small country with lots of frogs. We recently hit the mark of describing the 600 species of amphibian in Ecuador. So in a country like Ecuador, you can easily move on a single day to different places, find a lot of different species of frogs, and set a record that I am sure that other countries will be very interested in breaking, and that will start, a really interesting dynamic to try to raise awareness about the importance of frogs, as it has been very successfully done with birds.
Okay, great. Well, do you have anything else you'd like to say, or?
I have a couple, please.
Okay. Yes.
Sure.
So, talking to Carl, could you go on a little bit more in more generic, broader terms about the biodiversity in the area? We're heading into the Yasuni National Park area. Could you just speak in kind of general terms of where we're heading into? Like if someone has no idea what that region is like.
But you mean with regard to frogs or to in general?
In general, yeah.
Yeah, well, Yasuni National Park is one of the most biodiverse regions on Earth. For example, I can talk about amphibians because it's the field where I work, but that also applies to other animal groups. In Yasuni, you can find at a single location over 130 species of amphibians, which is more amphibians than you find in all the United States, just to give you an idea, or it's twice the number of species that you find in all of Europe. So in very, very small places, you can find a huge biodiversity, and even for regions like the Amazon, which are very well known for having high biodiversity, Yasuni is very special because you have a combination of species from the Amazon and also from the mountains that combine there and increase the diversity, and that's why Yasuni is such a special place, one of the richest places on Earth for biodiversity.
Excellent. Could you also talk to Carl? I'd like to know What brings you like personal joy and satisfaction in your work?
Well, for me, working with frogs is the most fulfilling activity that I can think of. Since I was a kid, I always loved frogs. I was amazed about frogs. And when I had the opportunity to study biology at the university and then to get to do a job working with frogs, it's like a dream. For me, it's like living a dream. And for me, there is nothing more fulfilling than going to the field, discovering frogs, discovering new species, naming them, studying their behavior, their evolution is something magical to me.
What is it about frogs that sets them apart, that fascinates you?
Well, I'll say that frogs are very special for many things. For example, they have a transition between tadpole and the adult animal, which are completely different. This type of change you don't see on any other animals. And also, I think that they have a kind of a humane personality, especially tree frogs. They have very large eyes, and they have also primate-like movements when they are in the trees. So I think that that's why many kids are instantly attracted to frogs when they see one, because they are so beautiful. They have some special quality that is difficult to define, but I think that every kid that has seen a frog feels that, and of course that makes them so special.
And then of course it's the sounds that we like, and just like birds,
exactly,
we can tell what the species is just by listening to them.
Yeah, of course. Well, the music of frogs is also something that is very close to all humanity. Different cultures associate frogs with richness, with fertility, because usually frogs call when there are rains, and for many cultures the rain is vital for agriculture and also for food production. So richness usually is associated with frogs, and that's why so many human cultures have a very positive, to frogs a very positive role in their culture.
I can tell you're passionate about your job, because you became like kid-like when you talked
Yes.
about frogs.
Right. Well, and we share interest that we've done some experiments playing back the sounds of frogs and trying to figure out where is the message in there, or can a male add his attractiveness by adding something new, and how do these so-called complex, it's really usually 2 or 3 sound elements, how does that evolve, and what are the 2 parts? Are they talking to other males, or are they talking to the female?
Right.
And so Santiago has done a beautiful piece of work actually questioning some other results, but that was how I think we first connected.
Yeah, of course. Now, Carly is really famous in that field of acoustic animal communication. He's one of the best in the world for that.
Excellent.